Kto mi to tutaj pokręcił?
Proszę o wprowadzenie sztandaru.
Please bring the color guard.
Proszę chór.
Now I would like to ask the choir to perform the national anthem.
Kiedy my żyjemy, co nam obca przemoc wzięła, szablą bierzemy. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski, za Twoim przewodem złączym się z narodem. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski, za Twoim przewodem złączym się z narodem. Przejdziem Wartę, będziem Polakami, dał nam przykład Bonaparte, jak zwyciężamy. Marsz, marsz Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski, za Twoim przewodem złączym się z narodem. Dąbrowski, z ziemi włoskiej do Polski, za Twoim przewodem złączym się z narodem. Zechcą Państwo siąść.
Ladies and gentlemen, please sit down.
Otwieram
I would like to open the special session of the Senate of the University of Lodz on the occasion of the 17th anniversary of establishing our university. During this celebration, we will confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa to Professor Umberto Eco. Esteemed members of the Senate, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored, on behalf of the authorities of the university, to welcome distinguished guests, employees of the university and academic students who have come to celebrate our anniversary. I would also like to welcome Professor Umberto Eco, to whom will confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa of the University of Lodz. Professor Eco has arrived with his spouse, Mrs. Renate Ramge, whom I would also like to welcome.
bardzo serdecznie
I would also like to welcome the supervisor, Professor Artur Gałkowski.
Doktorskim. Witam także.
And I would like to welcome the reviewer of Professor Umberto Eco's works, Professor Piotr Salwa from the University of Warsaw. I would like to welcome all graduates of our university. Here, today with us, we have many distinguished guests whom I would like to welcome. I will read out the list of the names of our guests, and finally, we will give them a round of applause. I would like to welcome the previous rectors of the University of Łódź, Professor Leszek Wojtczak, Professor Stanisław Liszewski, Professor Michał Seweryński, the Senator of the Republic of Poland, Professor Wiesław Puś. I would like to welcome rectors of Polish universities, Professor Bronisław Marciniak, the rector of the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, the chair of the Conference of Rectors in Poland, Professor Stanisław Niciej, the rector of the University of Opole, Professor Janusz Ostoja-Zagórski, the rector of the Kazimierz the Great University in Bydgoszcz, Professor Andrzej Tretyn, from the University of Copernicus University in Toruń, Professor Barbara Zbroińska from the Jan Kochanowski University in Kielce. I would like to welcome rectors of the public universities in Poland, Professor Mariusz Grzegorzko from the Film School in Łódź, Ms. Jolanta Fabisiak from the Academy of Fine Arts, Professor Cezary Stanecki from the Music Academy in Łódź, Professor Anna Jäger from the Medical University of Łódź, Professor Piotr Szczepaniak, Łódź University of Technology, Mariusz Rudzki.
Witam serdecznie pana profesora
I'd like to welcome Aleksander Welfe from the Polish Academy of Science in Łódź. I would like to welcome rectors and pro-rectors and other guests from foreign universities who we cooperate with. I would like to welcome President and the delegation from the University in Gießen in Germany.
Professor Siddike Semak Demir.
I'd like to welcome Professor from the Istanbul University in Turkey, Professor René Matlovich from the University of Prešov in Slovakia, Rector Professor Igor Sependa from the National Carpathian University in Ukraine, Rector Professor Liu Zhongting, together with a delegation from the University Jiangzhou in China, Professor Slavka Tomaszczykova from the University of Paweł Józef Szapalik in Košice, Vice Rector Professor Akira Shirahata from the University of Josai, Japan, Professor Zhu Guanglei, together with the delegation from the University of Nankai in China, Professor Yuri Kolin from the National University of Kharkiv in Ukraine, Chancellor Feng Yingchang from Zhangzhou College in China, together with the entire delegation, Professor Wolfgang Wegen from University of Vienna, Dr. Martin Zeigler from the Ruhr University in Bochum, Professor Maciej Hannenberg, a representative of Adelaide University in Australia, Professor Jan de Hulde, Kui Meng Wen de Kui, manager of Beijing Lin from China. Let me welcome members of Parliament and the senators of the Republic of Poland, Cezary Grabarczyk, Stefan Niesiołowski, Małgorzata Niemczyk, Iwona Śledzińska-Katarasińska, Ryszard Bonisławski, Kazimierz Michał Ujazdowski. Let me welcome Mr. Maciej Klimczak, Under Secretary of State in the Office of the President of Poland, Professor Małgorzata Szawnicka, a Judge of the Constitutional Court in Poland, Professor Marek Belka, President of the National Bank of Poland, and the President of the Honorary Committee for the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the University of Łódź, Krzysztof Kwiatkowski, the President of the Supreme Control Chamber, Professor Marek Zirk-Sadowski, Vice President of the Chief Administrative Court, Jolanta Chełmińska, the Wojewoda Łódzki, Ms. Hanna Zdanowska, the Mayor of the City of Łódź, Mr. Witold Stępień, the Marshal of the Łódzkie region. Let me welcome Zbigniew Włocki, the Manager of the National Center of Science, Krzysztof Jan Skrzydłowski, the Manager of the National Center of Research and Development, Mr. Ryszard Nitsch, President of the Council of the National Program for Development of the Humanities, Mr. Marek Druszka, the Manager of the Łódź branch of the National Remembrance Institute. Let me welcome Mr. Alessandro De Pattedis, the Ambassador of the Republic of Italy to Poland, and Mr. Tomasz Orłowski, the Ambassador of Poland to Rome. Let me welcome Honorary Consuls, Mr. Krzysztof Apostolidis, the Honorary Consul of the Kingdom of Denmark in Poland, Ms. Alicja Bień, Honorary Consul of the French Republic, Ms. Małgorzata Brzezińska, Honorary Consul of the United Kingdom and of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Wagocza, Honorary Consul of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, Ms. Elżbieta Jung, Honorary Consul of Finland, Mr. Kaczor, Honorary Consul of the Republic of Hungary, Władysław Kotaba, Honorary Consul of the Republic of Latvia, Szczepan Miłosz, Honorary Consul of the Republic of Austria, Mr. Paweł Skóra, Honorary Consul of the Republic of Moldova, Honorary Consul of the Czech Republic, Marek Mazur, President of the Sejmik of the Łódzkie region, Tomasz Kacprzak, President of the City Council in Łódź, and I also welcome Łódź School Superintendent Michał Kłos, President of the Court of Appeals in Łódź, Krzysztof Kacprzak, President of the Regional Court in Łódź, Krzysztof Bukowiecki, District Prosecutor in Łódź, Jarosław Szymański, Dean of the Regional Lawyers Council in Łódź, Dean of the Łódź Chambers of Legal Councils, President of the Notary Chamber, Mr. Szewczyk, Manager of the branch of the Chief Inspection Chamber. Let me welcome Witold Molda from the Provincial Police Headquarters in Łódź. Welcome the Regional Commander of the Fire Services, Municipal Commander of the Police Forces in Łódź, Mr. Andrzej Wyciszkiewicz, Municipal Commander of the Fire Brigade in Łódź. Let me welcome representatives of the clergy, Reverend Matula from the parish in Łódź, the priest for students in Łódź. Let me welcome heartily the sponsors and all the members of the Honorary Committee for the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the University of Łódź. Let me also welcome representatives of the press, television and media. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, today, on the 24th of May, we are celebrating the anniversary of the establishment of our university. Our university and its huge achievements in the area of science and education is enormous. We can be proud of having over 226,000 graduates. The role of the university and its employees, students and graduates during the 70 years of operation of our university have provided many reasons for our pride. However, we have to remember that the future is not a direct extrapolation of the past and the present. We have to face the challenges that the future brings. Now, being aware of the potential of our academic community, I deeply trust that the future will bring future development of our university and that will also bring many successes. My speech today is only limited to this very short part, as there are many more important things. I would like to inform you that due to today's celebration, we have received a lot of letters of congratulations from authorities, from rectors of other universities, friends of our university, and graduates. I would like to thank you all for these letters. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to read two of these letters. The first one is the letter from the President of the Republic of Poland, Bronisław Komorowski. The letter is addressed to Professor Umberto Eco. Dear Professor, please accept my congratulations on the occasion of conferring the title of Doctor Honoris Causa. This emphasizes how important it is to understand the world. In the consciousness of Polish readers, you imprinted the knowledge. You convince us not to believe the appearances and never to stop, that the reality may exist in another dimension. It is only enough to be open to the text to understand different levels of semiotics, regardless of whether the description applies to the medieval times or contemporary times. We become aware of the fact that we have to be ready for creative activity. Your works help us remember that writing does not only mean a collection of sounds and words, but a fascinating tool of communication. In order for a real understanding to exist, we have to have a thorough look into the words and respect every piece of information that determines the role of the human in the world, and we should remain conscious. This is what your books tell about. The Polish philosopher Stanisław Brzozowski, buried in the Trespiano cemetery, wrote that the humankind does not recognize the sense of the world outside themselves, but recognizes it deep inside themselves. This is what your works help us understand. This is a strenuous job that brings lots of satisfaction and the belief that every intellectual deed has its value. I would like to congratulate you on the honorary title. Please respect my expression of congratulations and let me wish you prosperity. signed by the President of the Republic of Poland, Bronisław Komorowski. We also have the following letter from the Prime Minister, Ewa Kopacz. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for the invitation to the special session celebrating the 17th anniversary of the Academic Łódź and the University of Łódź. Unfortunately, I am not able to participate personally, but I would like to convince you that I am with you with my thoughts and my heart. From the perspective of time, we can say that the University of Łódź and other academic institutions in Łódź have a very strong position in the world. This anniversary provides the opportunity to formulate plans for the future and is also the occasion to congratulate you on the successes so far. And I would also like to wish you successes in the future. Thank you very much.
Proszę Państwa, proszę teraz o wystąpienie.
I would like to ask Witold Stępień, the Marshal of the Łódzkie region, to take the floor.
Szanowny Senacie,
Esteemed members of the Senate, Your Magnificence, dear guests, let me start with congratulations for the University of Łódź. It is a very special day, the 24th of May, the day when we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the establishment of the university that contributes to the development of our region. It provides intellectual resources, provides knowledge and energy to operate. This is the place which integrates the region, having graduates from Łódź and from other places in our region. Without the University of Łódź, the region would not exist as a strong and developing region, and Łódź, that today is an academic city, would not exist. I would like to congratulate you on this anniversary. I would also like to say a few words to Professor Umberto Eco. I would like to start with a quotation. The world is full of marvelous things. If you want to know them, you have to read the books, because there is not enough life to travel all over the globe. This is a quotation from one of the books of our distinguished guest, which can be the leitmotif of today's celebration. This is a special celebration during which the title of Doctor Honoris Causa will be conferred to a distinguished personality, writer, scientist, and humanist. Professor Eco helps us remember that the measure of culture and civilization is the love to books and taking advantage of the great heritage of the humankind. Professor Eco remembers this truth in the era of violent technological development, when multimedia attempt to replace books and deprive us of the pleasure to read and to experience intellectual adventure of reading traditional books. I hope that the Faculty of Italian and Roman languages that studies contemporary Italian literature and achievements of Professor Umberto Eco will develop the cooperation and the research and will inspire for more frequent visits to our regions, to meeting people, and to discover the history of our city, and perhaps it will also be an inspiration for further works. Professor Eco wrote about himself, "I consider myself a young and promising writer who only published 5 novels so far, and certainly within the following years will publish more of them." This is what we all hope for. Professor, I suppose it is worth mentioning it here in Łódź that your works make us aware of the fact that our life is like a train journey. We can sit, look through the window, see the lights of cities blinking in the background, and look into the windows as if they were screens. But we can also sit comfortably, keep a book, and read about people, their stories, and how they live in the cities, towns, and villages that we travel through. Professor, we still want to travel with you.
Zapraszam do zabrania.
Let me invite the mayor of Łódź, Ms. Hanna Zdanowska. Magnificent members of the Senate, dear guests, dear graduates and students of the University of Łódź. When we celebrate such special anniversaries, 70 years is a great piece of history. Always our remembrance go to those times where the university was established, and those were times when the newly created university only counted 6 faculties, 3 of which were medical, and a few thousand students. Today, the potential is incomparable. That's tens of faculties, including ones which we run together, something that we couldn't think of in the past, that are initiated, and the scope of studies is related to business, to local authorities. For that cooperation, for your being open, for you seeing the needs of the current market, that together with us you change the city, the region. I want to heartily thank you very much to all the professors, lecturers, staff of the university, because it's you who educate the staff that manage not only our city, the region, but who also for many years have developed our state, Poland. For that input from the University of Łódź into the common wealth that our city, the region, the state is, I heartily, on behalf of all the people of Łódź, thank you. And taking this opportunity, I would like also to thank and congratulate Professor Umberto Eco. It's a great honor for us to host you here together with your wife in our city, and I do hope that the time you are going to spend in Łódź will not only bring you positive emotions related to this extraordinary honor that is doctorate honoris causa, but you will have a moment to meet our city and perhaps write a great story about it, as only you, Professor, can do. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to wish many, many decades of good work, perfect cooperation between us, and I want to thank you for what you have done to us and ask you for more and more, which needs more and more specialized personnel, which is changing its image. And I think that the basic tools so that our dreams can come true are the people who shape our shaped by our universities. All the best and have a nice celebration, be it special time, not only for the people of Łódź, but also those who are not here with us, but are with their hearts here. Thank you very much.
Wysoki Sejmie,
Members of the Senate, dear guests, on the 17th of November 2014, the Senate of the University of Łódź passed a resolution on conferring the title of the Doctor Honoris Causa, the greatest honor a university can grant, upon Professor Umberto Eco.
2014, the Senate of the University of Łódź decided to confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa of the University of Łódź, which is the highest honorary degree of the university, upon Professor Umberto Eco.
That's what we could read about Professor Umberto Eco, renowned semiotics philosopher, novelist, was written in the review by Professor Salva, who is here with us, and I would like to quote a fragment of his review. Professor Umberto Eco belongs to the most renowned representatives of the contemporary humanities. For decades, he has impressed unquestionable influence upon its contemporary shape. Also, for decades, his thoughts have been known and creatively used in Poland by enriching our native cultural studies and literature studies.
Review by Professor Piotr Salva. Professor Umberto Eco is one of the most eminent representatives in the field of contemporary humanities. He has undoubtedly affected its shape for many decades. His outstanding creativity has been well known and widely used in a most fruitful way in Poland for a great many years, enriching our native cultural and literature studies. Proszę Państwa,
Ladies and gentlemen, the reviewers and proceedings to confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa by the University of Łódź were Professor Piotr Salva from the University of Warsaw, Professor Tadeusz Sławek from the Silesian University, and Professor Jarosław Płóciennik from our University of Łódź. Now I'd like to invite Professor Artur Gałkowski, the promoter in the proceedings to confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa, to present his laudation. Your Magnificence Rector of the University of Łódź, honorable members of the Senate, Your Excellency Ambassador of the Republic of Italy to Poland, Honorable Ambassador of the Polish Republic to Italy, dear Mayor of Łódź, dear Voivod, dear Marshal, honored Professor Umberto Eco, dear Ms. Eco, Your Magnificencies, distinguished guests gathered here at this ceremony, all of you listening to my words. The University of Łódź is honored toward the highest academic distinction, Dr. Honoris Causa, to one of the most distinguished humanists of our times, Professor Umberto Eco, an Italian semiotician, thinker, medievalist, literary scholar and linguist, at the same time cultural and media expert, world-class novelist and essayist. Umberto Eco, professor of the University of Bologna, is also a world-renowned journalist, commentator of social, ideological, historical events, editor, connoisseur of books and documents, including Incunabula, renowned organizer of science, president of research institutes, academic lecturer at Italian and foreign universities, member of numerous prestigious scientific organizations, associations, scientific committees, and editorial boards of journals, publishing papers in areas so close to his heart. Prose writer who has managed to escape the academic elitism while retaining his learned esotericism, illustrator, aesthetician, shortly speaking, a versatile and uniquely competent authority on the academic, social and artistic scene in Italy, Europe and the world. Professor Umberto Eco was born on the 5th January 1932 in, let me quote, Alessandria, not the city in Egypt, but the one up in the mountains in the north near Milan. As his literary hero, Bottolino, Piedmont, Lombardy and Emilia-Romagna are the main regions of Italy where Umberto Eco has lived his private and professional life. He studied philosophy, aesthetics and history of art at the University of Turin. This is where he also started his academic career in 1961, teaching aesthetics at the Faculty of Philology and Philosophy, Facola di Lettere e Filosofia. From mid-1960s, he lectured on similar topics at the faculties of architecture of the Technical University of Milan and the University of Florence, to finally, at the beginning of 1970s, form a permanent bond with the University of Bologna, where he taught semiotics. In 1975, he became a professor and the head of the Department of Semiotics, as well as the Institute of Communication and Performing Arts, Istituto di Discipline della Comunicazione e dello Spettacolo. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, he also lectured abroad at universities in Argentina and the United States. His visiting professor duties intensified at the beginning of the 1980s. He taught at Harvard, Yale, Columbia, New York University, Cambridge, Oxford, Collège de France, École Normale Supérieure in Paris, University of Toronto, and many others. Since the early 1970s, he has been associated with the International Association for Semiotic Studies, performing managerial and honorary positions. In the 1980s, he created and chaired outstanding academic institutions, the PhD program in semiotics at the University of Bologna and the International Center for Semiotics and Cognitive Studies at the University of San Marino. Since 1999, he has been the president of the famous Advanced School of Humanistic Studies, Scuola Superiore degli Studi Umanistici at the University of Bologna. I will discuss the outstanding academic and literary achievement of Professor Eco later in my laudatory speech. Let me add now that our distinguished guest, throughout over 50 years long career, received numerous honors and highest academic distinctions. He is one of the most frequent recipients of honorary doctorates among the scholars, writers and thinkers in the world. This one is the 40th honorary degree in his career, and it follows the honorary doctorate given to him by the University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. The honorary degree from the University of Łódź is the second one he has received from a Polish university. In 1996, he was honored by the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw. It is impossible, even in the most concise form, to present all the competences, talents and merits that should be associated with Professor Umberto Eco. He is unquestionably a cultural treasure, universally considered a phenomenon. This neological construct of eco-phenomenon is truly a clear linguistic sign which expresses what Professor Eco contributes to the global intellectual and artistic legacy. Eco-phenomenon, as a complex cultural term, comprises numerous meanings expressed by the similarly created phrases like eco-semiotician or eco-semiologist, eco-writer, eco-essayist, eco-theoretician, eco-structuralist, eco-analyst, eco-classifier, eco-medievalist, eco-art lover, eco-aware of the pop culture, eco-journalist, etc., etc. Many of these meanings and aspects have been presented during the event surrounding Professor Eco's visit to the University of Lodz, forming the festival entitled Labyrinth of Science, a series of conferences, meetings, discussions, contests, academic and documentary publications, exhibitions, art projects, documentary films and press reports. All of them have been meant to analyze and interpret Umberto Eco's thought in a group of experts in literary theory, translation theory and practice, linguistics, philosophy, cultural and media studies, and mass culture studies, but also together with the ordinary readers and average participants of cultural life. With all those recipients of Eco's work, especially the younger generation, we decided to organize the Labyrinth of Science, which has a chance of becoming a cyclical event under the auspices of our university and featuring prominently in the cultural and academic calendar of Łódź and Poland. The 2015 festival owes its existence to the cooperation of many people, organizations and institutions, including several universities in academic Łódź, celebrating the 70th anniversary. The festival also involves the publication of an art book entitled The Power of Intellect, which we are honored to dedicate to Professor Umberto Eco. We hope that Maestro will enjoy both its form and content. Hopefully, it will become a valuable source of knowledge, presenting a cross-section of Polish research on Umberto Eco's works and themes so dear to him. The book has been designed as an artwork, a work of art which evokes the concepts of a labyrinth and a tree. It comprises 3 sections, the official one, the analytical, and unique bibliography of publications by and on Umberto Eco in Poland. In addition, the festival features a series of conferences, including the International Semiotic Conference Sign Thought Word Work, which starts tomorrow, and the Graduate and Postgraduate Conference in April entitled Ecomondo, the reception of literary and academic works by Umberto Eco. At the initiative of our students, there will be a special bilingual edition of the Journal of the Italian Studies under a semiotically intriguing title Ecco Italiamo. We should also appreciate the involvement of the intercollegiate student group with the fashion-related humanist and art project Beauty and Ugliness. It also involves spoken and word performances, film and music. The Interdisciplinary Center for Human Studies at the University of Łódź initiated a series of meetings showing the Eco phenomenon, which included presentations of Eco's novels, performative readings of his works, intersemiotic location-based games, film screenings, panel discussions of translators and essayists, as well as various pop cultural events. Yet another event that we hope will be a nice surprise to Professor Eco is a contest for the best in Italian translations of Wiesława Szymborska poems. What symbolically connects all the above-mentioned initiatives and events is a multimedia exhibition at the library of the University of Lodz devoted to the reception of Umberto Eco's work en bloc. The short laudatory speech can merely scratch the surface of Professor Eco's achievements. The Labyrinth of Science 2015 shows us in deep. Professor, I invite you to see the festival.
Honored Professor Eco, I have to admit that preparing even a brief overview of your outstanding performance as an erudite and a Renaissance man Although there was no one back then who would even dream of many phenomena you thoroughly analyze, is a challenging, responsible, and almost inconceivable task. Unlike many previous accounts, we have the honor of recalling all your accomplishments, which have emerged since the 1990s. Such a summary should include both what is now considered classic in your works and texts created over the past 3 decades. The new is, of course, a continuation of the assumptions and theses expressed in your most prominent theoretical and essayistic works from the 1960s and 70s, such as Open Work, Art and Beauty in the Middle Ages, The Role of the Reader, A Theory of Semiotics, a lecture in Fabula. Some of them now sound like winged words. This was followed by a period of validation and expansion of your field of study. In the 1980s, you published numerous interdisciplinary books, serving as an example of successful scientific symbiosis. Your activity does not slow down in the 1990s, nor in the first and second decade of the 21st century. We have the pleasure of enjoying such works as The Limits of Interpretation, Interpretation and Over-Interpretation, In Search of the Perfect Language, 6 Walks in the Fictional Woods, 5 Moral Pieces, Kant and the Platypus, La Bustina di Minerva on Literature, Turning Back the Clock, Hot Wars and Media Populism, From the Tree to the Labyrinth, Confessions of a Young Novelist, and Inventing the Enemy. It is also impossible not to mention your editing of such books as The Infinity of Liszt, On Beauty, On Ugliness, and the Book of Legendary Lands. We should also light the latest, since 2007, monumental compendia of knowledge on history and meaning in the culture of ancient Greece, Rome, and the Orient, modern era and contemporary times, philosophy and museum collections that you edited or co-edited, including Il Cinquecento, Historia, Il Medievo, 3 volumes, La Grande Storia, 14 volumes, L'Antichità Grecia, L'Età Moderna e Contemporanea, 10 volumes, Storia della Filosofia, 3 volumes, El Museo, La Filosofia e le sue storie. A collection of encyclopedic and historical works written or edited by Umberto Eco is really impressive. Presumably, this is the result of the whole life of Professor Eco, his thorough studies and research, as well as his relentless efforts to motivate his friends and colleagues to study such vast fields of knowledge. Umberto Eco's latest works are already lined up to become known all over the world, though they are surely a challenge for translators. We have to admit that Italy and Italians are very lucky, not for the first time in history, that they have Umberto Eco as a member of their national community. They can read him in his original language, immediately familiarizing themselves with his works and statements, not to mention the Italian studies developing so dynamically and influences of Umberto Eco on the global culture. It would be a cliché to emphasize that Polish readers, as well as readers all over the world, remain under the charm of your 7 novels. 7 since January this year. The latest one, Numero Zero, has been already published in Poland by the Noir sur Blanc publishing house, brilliantly translated by Krzysztof Żaboklicki. The novels make a separate chapter in the versatile activity of Professor Eco, the most spectacular when it comes to both popular, which I mean as a compliment, reception, and feedback from connoisseurs and experts. Personally, however, I think there is more to Umberto Eco's work, passions and accomplishments than his novels. Whoever delves into Eco phenomenon notice that this Italian writer's novels are, without diminishing their artistry and originality, an addendum and illustration of his scholarly theories and methodologies. This can be said about his sublime literary blockbuster, The Name of the Rose, translated into over 50 languages, the intellectually demanding, mysterious and abduction-filled Foucault's Pendulum, the philosophically grounded story with a question about the comprehension of all things in the island of the day before, Baudolino filled with sensitivity and curiosity about the world, the Prague Cemetery exposing conspiracies, socio-ideological prejudice and personal impairments. The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana being the quasi-autobiographical collage about the power and powerlessness of memory, and Numero Zero dealing with the problems of contemporary political and social life in Italy. The validity of the observation that Umberto Eco's literary works are a complement to and not a byproduct of his scholarly activity is also substantiated by the scholar's own views on this additional profession. Umberto Eco considers himself a young novelist, namely exploring, experimenting, writing under the influence of his passion for narration. However, each novel by Eco is not only a professional novel written by an experienced theoretician and careful reader of other authors. It is a dog novel to use a metaphorical language of wine, which is dry, rich in content and brilliant at the same time, which we savor and discover with a passion satisfying our sixth sense, the intellect. Umberto Eco's novel unfolds with him according to his ideas about the participation of the reader in the interpretation process and the main purpose of the book, namely providing pleasure, aesthetic, spiritual, intellectual. Can Umberto Eco's literary work be authoritatively assessed right now? Certainly not. I would not even attempt to do so, realizing that as a reader, I am dealing with a uniquely distinctive writing originating in the genealogical polyphony, which may be redefined as a genre in the future, embedded in a complex cultural, artistic, and ideological space. We know now that your works are not only postmodern, neo-avant-garde, combinatory, intertextual, palimpsest, based on meta-linguistic games and double coding. A more apt description of them, however, is yet to appear. Apropos the readership and a certain mission related to it, as a man of books, you undoubtedly are the promoter of the culture of reading, remembering, connecting facts and ideas, which you keep reminding of to each generation you come in contact with. You have recently written in L'Espresso a letter to your proverbial grandson, dazed with the noise of information of the contemporary reality, who, as a result, pays attention only to isolated remnants of the message taken out of context and who fails to remember much of it. You rightfully prove how imperfect this attitude is. By the way, you foresaw the consequences that we now blame on the internet and electronics long ago, before we even knew anything about the web. Clearly, you have foreseen the creation of the internet and its conquest of the information space. Clairvoyance combined with erudition, passion, scholarly inquisitiveness and personal charisma is your hallmark when talking to both the model reader and the experiential one. It is also evident in the way you deal with the public opinion, which, as you claim, you do not want to and do not need to influence. Considering mainly the last perspective, we confer the honorary title of Doctor Honoris Causa to a brilliant scholar and writer working in the field of the humanities, which encompasses basic sciences and academic disciplines taught at the Faculty of Philology of the University of Lodz, namely literary theory, linguistics, cultural studies, as well as those offered by other faculties, philosophy, history, history of art and ethnology, and partially psychology, pedagogy and sociology. Both the fields listed above and other disciplines that are dear to Professor Eco can be sewn together using the thread of his definition of semiotics as, I quote, theory describing the whole of human culture, based on, to quote Peter Bondanella, the notion of culture as a complex combination of messages and codes. You would probably say that such a view should not be treated as a prerogative. Let us, however, consider you an authority on that, appreciating your view on some attitudes, points of view, approaches to science, faith, aesthetics, ethics, etc. While I would not like to elaborate on that, as this is neither the proper time nor place, let me recall your famous dialogue on equal terms in Liberal with late Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, a renowned biblical scholar and the Archbishop of Milan. It was then published in Poland under a telling title, Who Does a Non-Believer Believe In? Your judgment that there is no single truth, combined with your belief in everything, meaning everything that is good for humans, and the reality surrounding them, resonates even more strongly in the tumultuous circumstances which the world is now facing, even if we cannot fully comprehend this everything, humbly assuming the role of the unwise and thus reserved in our belief in understanding. To quote your Polish colleague and friend, Professor Jerzy Pelc. There is no doubt that there are many supporters of your thinking and your view of the world. This view corresponds to the ideals of the university, the openness to knowledge, the mission of a scholar, and any other humanist who participates in shaping the culture and commenting on it. We value for this attitude. Let me again emphasize that we have the pleasure of hosting a great Italian, the ambassador of the Italian language and culture, a person of numerous talents, passions, and sublime sense of humor, the author of dozens of books, countless essays, articles, lectures, the winner of many national and international awards such as Premio Strega, Prima DC, and the recent Gutenberg Prize. The member of many renowned institutions, such as the Italian Accademia dei Lincei or the Polish Academy of Arts and Sciences, the commander of the French Legion of Honor, founder and curator of journals, department schools, an erudite of immense narrative and theoretical imagination, a philosopher of, as you yourself confess, secular religiousness, a charismatic scholar, university lecturer, a citizen and a humanist authority of the world. Honored Professor Eco, please accept this respectful bow from the academic community of the University of Lodz and the wishes of good health and further fruitful work in the realm of literature and in the academia.
Comunità dell'Università di Lodz.
Proszę.
Please rise.
Bardzo proszę.
Let me invite Professor Gałkowski, the promoter, to read the diploma.
Professore. Quod felix Faustum fortunantumque sit, summis auspiciis serenissime rei publice Polonorum, nos Vladimirus Nykiel, juris doctor, ordinarius liberalium doctrinarium professor, Universitatis Lodziensis hoc tempore rector magnificus, Petrus Stalmaszczyk, humaniorum artium scientiaeque linguarum doctor, ordinarius liberalium doctrinarem professor, facultatis philologice hoc tempore decanus. Arturus Gałkowski, humaniorum artium scientiaeque linguarum doctor, romanicarum linguarum et precipue Italice Franco-Galliceque scientia eruditissimus, Universitatis Lodziensis professor, promotor rite constitutus in virum clarissimum Umbertum Eco, de Italorum terra philosophum, medievi rerum investigatorem peritissimum, in verborum significatu praeterea, questionibusque linguisticis explanandis doctissimum, rerum praeteritarum nec non recentiorem scriptorem excellentissimum, diligentem venustatis consignitatisque indagatorem, veterum voluminum cultorem ardentissimum, diligentem venustatis consignitatisque indagatorem, ordinarium apud universitatem bononiensiem professorem, academiae linceorum sodalem, virum doctissimum illustrissimum honestissimum, qui suis operibus ad querebus assegestis, humano de cultu augendo scientiacque provehenda optime meritus est. Universitatis Lodzensis senatus auctoritate, doctoris honoris causa, nomen et honores iura et privilegia contulimus, in eiusque rei fidem haste litteras Universitatis Sigilio Sanciendas curavimus, datum Lodzie, die 24 mensis Mai, anno bis 1510, promotor, rector magnificus, decanus.
I would like to ask the promoter and Professor Piotr Stalmaszczyk to accompany me during the ceremony of handing the diploma to Professor Eco.
Szanowny Panie,
Dear Professor, I confer the title of Doctor Honoris Causa of the University of Łódź. Welcome to the academic community of the university. We are so proud that among our honoris causa doctors we have such an excellent figure. On behalf of the members of the Senate and my own, let me wish you good health, good luck, successes in your professional and private life.
Now I would like to ask Professor Umberto Eco to deliver a speech. Honorable Professor Eco, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, in opening my speech for the Congress that will start tomorrow, I have first of all to thank the Łódź University for the great honor conferred on me, but I would also like to remember how much I feel in debt to the Polish culture. Let me start from my adolescence when I discovered classical music through Chopin, an artist which I continue to love all along my adult life. So I was so happy yesterday to visit his native place. As far as the writers are concerned, even I probably read at the age of 12 Quo Vadis, I want only to quote two authors that I loved very much. One is Stanislav Jesse Letts, whom as an editor I made translated into Italian with a preface. And I consider Letts a genius. And compared to him, Karl Kraus was a writer for Chinese cookies. The other is Wisława Szymborska, whom I ventured to meet only 1 year before her death, and with whom, even if we had never met before, immediately occurred such a mutual human sympathy that, by joking, we said that if we had had the chance to meet when we were younger, then we would have had a love affair. Having written a book on the search for a perfect language, I even studied Zamenhof, Esperanto, and in the course of my philosophical studies, I tried to approach the logical researches of Audiukiewicz, Tarski, whom I made translator in a philosophical series I directed, Kotarbinsky, not to quote my friend Jesse Peltz. Having largely written on aesthetics, I was enriched by the books of Roman Ingarden. And as far as my studies on medieval aesthetics are concerned, let me also quote not only Władysław Tatarkiewicz, but also a remote author such as Vitello, a forerunner in the 13th century of the modern optics. Then I must cite Adam Schaff, and I was in friendly relation with Stefan Morawski and Leszek Kolakowski. And recently, I feel very much indebted with Zygmunt Bauman, of which I share many of his lucid opinions about present society. Since I was also concerned with many eccentric characters, I also discovered that forgotten fellow who was Joseph Hurley Wronski. I have all his works in my rare books collection called Biblioteca Semiologica Curiosa, Lunatica, Magica e Pneumatica. And even Wronski can be listed among the category of the fou littéraire. Let me remember that certain of his ideas deserves some lines of appreciation by Roman Jakobson. Finally, in 1996, I was appointed as a doctor honoris causa by the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, where it was still alive, another of my best Polish friends, Bronislaw Geremek. I am not drawing a profile of the Polish culture, obviously, but only remembering certain encounters that have been important for my scholarly life and which stress some of the links between me and this country. Let me now come to the subject matter of my opening speech, dealing with the past and the future of semiotics. In doing so, I am obliged to return to Poland because it is in this country that the program for an international association of semiotic studies was designed. The idea of an international association of scholars interested in semiotics began to be anticipated during an initial encounter in Kazimierz in 1966, which followed a more informal meeting in Warsaw. Then, in 1968, a second meeting was held in Warsaw. Unfortunately, a few days before, there was the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia, and it was difficult for many scholars to reach Poland. The day of the invasion, I was in Prague, just on the way to Warsaw, and I succeeded in abandoning this country with my car, and I arrived in Vienna, and from there, flying upon the Baltic Sea in order to avoid the Czech skies, we arrived in Warsaw, in a moment that was politically difficult even in this country. On the grounds of the discussions held in Warsaw, It was decided to meet later in '69 in Paris, when various scholars, including Roman Jacobson, Emile Benveniste, Roland Barthes, Julia Kristeva, Thomas Siebeok, Jesse Pels, and Algirdas Greimas, decided to found the International Association for Semiotic Studies. On that occasion, it was decided to adopt the term semiotics used by Peirce, Russian, and English-speaking authors like Morris, for example, in preference to the term semiology, which was widespread in other linguistic areas. The decision was taken for empirical reasons, in the sense that we wanted to avoid many subtle distinctions then current in various circles, as, for example, the use of semiology for studies deriving from structural linguistics and semiotics for those of a more philosophical nature. And the intention was to establish the idea that a single term could define various types of approach to the world of science. But the choice of semiotics, as supported by Jacobson, also aimed at establishing the notion that the field of study concerning the sign went beyond linguistics. After the meeting in Paris, there was another in Parma in 1971, in which Cesare Segre was appointed as president of the association, while I became the secretary general. And so Segre and I, we began to organize the first international congress. The preparation took 4 years, and we thought we had contacted at least 200 scholars who had shown an interest in semiotics, but at the opening of the Congress, 800 people showed up. After a general section that opened with the seminal coup d'œil sur le développement de la sémiotique by Roman Jacobson, there was a philosophical section devoted to foundations, one of the relationships between linguistics and semiotics, and then came section on formalized languages, semantics and pragmatics, the semiotics of literature, iconism and visual arts, theater, cinema, architecture, television, and music, a section devoted to the semiotics of culture, one on non-verbal behavior, and one on psychology and psychiatry. It was a vast panorama, but it was a question of seeing whether apparently different problems could be tackled using the same instruments. It was on that occasion that I began to think about the difference between a general semiotics and the various specific semiotics. The result of these reflections appeared in a definite form in '84 in my Semiotics and the Philosophy of Language. A specific semiotics is, or aims at being, the grammar of a particular science system and proves to be successful insofar as it describes a given field of communicative phenomena as ruled by a system of signification. Thus, there are grammars of American Sign Language, of traffic signals, of a particular game, poker, for instance. These systems can be studied from a syntactic, semantic, or pragmatic point of view. A specific semiotics can aspire to a scientific status since it studies phenomena that are usually stable, even though a code for traffic signals can have a shorter life than a phonological system, or vice versa. And lexical systems are in a continuous process of transformation. Being scientific, a specific semiotics can have a predictive power. It can tell which expressions produced according to the rules of a given system of signification are acceptable or grammatical, and which ones a user of the system would presumably produce in a given situation. Not every specific semiotics can claim to be like a natural science. However, when cultural anthropology, for instance, studies the kinship system in a certain society, it works upon a rather stable field of phenomena, can produce a theoretical object, can make some prediction about the behavior of the members of this society. The same happens with the lexical analysis of the system of terms expressing kinship relationships in the same society. All around this area of more or less established and rigorous grammatical knowledge, there is barely definable twilight zone of semiotically oriented practice, such as the application of semiotic notion to literary criticism or the analysis of political discourse. The task and the nature of a general semiotics are different. To outline a project for a general semiotics is not sufficient to assert, as Saussure did, that language is a system comparable to writing, symbolic rites, deaf, mute, alphabets, military signals, and so on. In order to conceive of such an endeavor, one must say in which sense these different systems are mutually comparable, whether they are all systems in the same sense of the word system, and whether the mutual comparison of these systems can therefore reveal common systematic laws capable of explaining from a unified point of view their way of functioning. I think that such a discipline cannot be a science in the same sense as physics or electronics. If there is something that deserves the name of general semiotics, this something is a discourse dealing with the above question, and such a discourse is a philosophical one. In any case, it encounters the problems raised by the philosophy of language, because in order to answer the above questions, it is obliged to reconsider from a general and not merely linguistic point of view classical issues such as meaning, reference, truth, context, and communication acts, be they vocal or not, as well as such logical problems as analytic versus synthetic, necessity, implication, entailment, inference, hypothesis, and so on. According to many classical approaches, from the Stoics through Augustine and from Locke to Jacobson, a general semiotics is concerned with the concept of sign as a phenomenon of referral or standing for, aliquid stat pro aliquo. One may decide that the theoretical object of semiotics can be a different and more fruitful one, let's say texts, semiosis, significant practice, communication, language, affability, and so on. But the real problem is not so much which object has to be appointed as the central one. The problem is to decide whether there is a unified object or not. Now, this object can become the central object of a general semiotics insofar as one decides that such a category can explain a series of human and maybe animal behaviors, be they vocal, visual, thermal, gestural, or other. In this sense, the first question of a general semiotics is close to the capital question of any philosophy of language. What does it mean for human beings to speak, to express meanings, to convey ideas, or to mention states of the world? But what means by what means do people perform these tasks? Only by words? And if not, what is there in common between verbal activity and other signifying activities? I thought that the general semiotics improves some of the traditional approaches of the philosophy of language, but it assumes that it is impossible to speak about verbal language without comparing it to other forms of signification and communication. In this sense, general semiotics is fundamentally comparative in its approach. But it is enough to think, for instance, of Wittgenstein, or Husserl, or of Cassirer, to realize that the good philosophy of language necessarily takes this stance. In these early years, semiotics assumed that if comparison is possible between different ways of signifying, these ways should be described as systems. And at that time, the research was dominated by the notion of code. Later, I and others abandoned the idea of a rigid system, if not for some limited and local representation, and I adopted in exchange the notion of a encyclopedia structured as a network. But this is another story which concerns my personal research. A general semiotics is influenced more than any philosophy of language by the experiences of specific semiotics. Not every philosopher of language would agree with such a project. Many of them assume that the categories provided in order to explain verbal language cannot hold when applied to other alleged phenomena of signification. Concerning this, let me quote a discussion which I had in the 70s with Gilbert Harman during a Christian Gauss seminar at Princeton. Harman wrote in Semiotics and Cinema, smoke means fire, and the word combustion means fire, but not in the same sense of means. The word means is ambiguous. To say that smoke means fire is to say that smoke is a symptom, sign, indication, or evidence for fire. To say that the word combustion means fire is to say that people use that word to mean fire. Furthermore, there is no ordinary sense of the word mean in which a picture of a man means a man or means that man. This suggests that Peirce's theory of size would comprise at least three rather different subjects: a theory of the intended meaning, a theory of evidence, and the theory of pictorial depiction. There is no reason to think that these theories must contain common principles. I was convinced that Harman was wrong, and I objected that his argument clashed, first of all, with linguistic usage. Why have people used the word sign for more than 2,000 years to define phenomena that should be divided into three different categories? Second, Harman's objection goes against the consensus gentium of the philosophical tradition. From the Stoics to the Middle Ages, and from Locke to Peirce, from Husserl to Wittgenstein, there has been a constant attempt to find a common basis for the theory of linguistic meaning and for the theory of pictorial depiction, and also for the theory of meaning and the theory of inference. When we examine the problem of the Stoic semeion, we will see how ambiguous and inextricable the relationship is between a fact, from which many consequences can be inferred, the proposition that represents it, and the sentence that expresses that proposition. In any event, what makes these problems difficult to separate is precisely the fact that in every case, aliquid stat pro aliquo. The manner of standing for may vary, yet we still face a peculiar dialectics of presence and absence. It is not a good enough reason to ask whether a common mechanism, however deep, might govern both phenomena. Even though I dealt with the specific semiotics in various written works, for instance, apropos of narratology, my basic interest has always been in a general semiotics, and I hold that general semiotics is a form of philosophy, perhaps the only form of philosophy permissible today. And in this I share the idea that contemporary philosophy has been characterized by a linguistic turn. On this slide, I thought in the Second Congress, Vienna, 1959, in this line of thought, in the Second Congress, held in Vienna, 59, I launched an appeal for the studies in the history of semiotics. And after that event, many important researches on the historical roots of our discipline were fruitfully developed. Many other congresses followed every 5 years, and I began to realize that the ideas of general semiotics were in minority compared to the various studies on specific semiotics. In addition, in the 70s, many scholars were shifting their attention from the fundamentals, the nature of the sign, the signified and iconic resemblance, to an analysis of texts. This was a most productive period, but my impression was that after having worked out a series of analytical instruments, the business of applying them to texts ran the risk of finding the same mechanism in every one. Think of the suggestions made by the Russian formalists, also the theories of narratology. I held that after Greimas and Genet theories of narrative texts, every textual analysis seemed to appear as a mere tautology. In other words, whether one was analyzing Tolstoy or a detective story, it was always possible to identify the mechanism brought to light by narratology. In the sense in which the analysis of a tragedy can only highlight the narrative devices explained in Aristotle's Poetics. But this was not my whimsical opinion, which came very late. I found recently in Roland Barthes' SZ, 1970, this remark. There are said to be certain Buddhists whose ascetic practices enable them to see a whole landscape in a being. Precisely what the first analysts of narrative were attempting, to see all the world's stories, and there have been ever so many, with a single structure. We shall, they thought, extract from each tale its model. Then out of these models we shall make a great narrative structure, which we shall reapply for verification to anyone's narrative. A task as exhausting, 90% perspiration as the saying goes, as it is ultimately undesirable, for the text thereby loses its difference. What many people were losing sight of was the philosophical basis of semiotics. I realized this many years later when I took part in the International Congress held at the University of California, Berkeley, in '94. To quote only a few items, not of speeches but of sections, there were sessions of meta-theory, artificial intelligence, cognitive science, analysis of political discourses, temporality, Japanese pragmatics, semiotics of silence, semiotics of death, cyberspace, legal semiotics, media, body, religion, marketing, calligraphy, humor, education, sign processing, human-computer interaction, postmodern library and information science, older sexuality, analysis of the Cold War, medical semiotics, and even symmetry in crystallography. Clearly, this program mirrored the coexistence of a plurality of interests, say, more diverse topics. Not having followed all the meetings, I cannot say if there were common criteria for investigating both the semiotics of death and symmetry in crystallography. I think the organizers' purpose was not to provide and to impose a unified theoretical framework, but rather to take account of a variety of subject matter and the theoretical approaches. I also think that the choice of the topics was due to geographical accidents, and I suspect that there was Japanese pragmatics and not Eskimo semantics, because the Congress took place on the Pacific coast and not in the Arctic Circle. However, all these scholars certainly believed that there were family resemblances between so many disconnected interests and methods, as if they were trying to produce a new Diderot's encyclopedia, which considered together the Gobelin tapestry and God, Egyptian hieroglyphs and windmills. Can still we speak at this point of a discipline, or should we accept the idea that we are not so much interested in discovering a unified semiotic approach, but in browsing through the semiotic web? Thus, I became more and more convinced that semiotics is not the name of a single science or discipline, but rather that of a department or school, just as there is no single science called medicine, but instead schools of medicine, in the academic sense of the expression. In a school of medicine, we have surgery, biochemistry, dietetics, immunology, psychiatry, and so on, something, even acupuncture and homeopathy. In such a school, experts in a given branch tend more and more not to understand the purpose and the language of other specialists, but in spite of such discrepancies, they can all work together because they have a common object, the human body, and the common purpose is its health. Semiotics is perhaps something similar, a field in which different approaches have, at a higher level of generality, a common object, semiosis. I don't know if there are cases of semiosis in crystallography, but there certainly are instances of semiosis even in the decision to keep silent in order to express perplexity or to refuse to agree with a given opinion. The only problem is how to define semiosis and to provide criteria for identifying it every time it shows up. This remains the purpose of a general semiotics. And I do not think that one can study Japanese pragmatics without entertaining a rigorous and philosophical concept of semiosis. What can be the future of semiotics? Semioticians are perhaps able to analyze prophetic texts, but are not prophets themselves. They don't rank Nostradamus among their founding fathers. However, the question is not a whimsical one. Every discipline is subject to historical changes, and the paths it takes are always motivated by the will, I would say the duty, to react to some phenomena typical of a given cultural moment. As far as semiotics is concerned, its first problem was with Parmenides, to distinguish between the reliability of semata, or natural science, and the unreliability of onomata, that is, words. Aristotle approached the semiotic phenomena by distinguishing between sounds, things, and pathemata, the psyches, that is the mental image, or the idea that verbal sounds activate in our mind. This also happened because Greek culture was ascertaining the existence of barbarians, of people who at first glance had no language at all, but in fact were able to designate the things by words, by their own words. The same idea was worked out more finally by the Stoics, and it was by chance that they were originally Phoenicians, that is, bilingual thinkers, perfectly aware of the fact that in different countries the same thoughts are meant by different words. Romans were so steadily convinced that their Latin was the only viable language, they did not elaborate the semiotics of their own, except for a theory of translation, since they had to absorb and emulate the Greek heritage. And rhetoric, indispensable for their legal and political purposes. Medieval schoolmen were not concerned with languages other than Latin. Before them, Augustine had started a very complex theory and practice of biblical hermeneutics, but without knowing Hebrew and with a vague, if not null, knowledge of Greek. Their semiotic contribution mostly concerned two items which were crucial for their cultural purpose, namely textual interpretation, that is the hermeneutics of the Bible, and the relationship between words and universals. Only from Roger Bacon to Occam, in a new cultural climate, become very sensitive, the Middle Age, to natural experience, and they switched to the study of relationship between signa and res, and between a true proposition and what was the case. In the 17th century, the word semiotics reappeared, centuries after Galen, and not only in Locke, to designate the doctrine of science, also because only at that moment the European culture became fully aware of the existence of other culture and other forms of writing, from the Chinese ideograms to the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Between 19th and 20th century, we had finally Charles Sanders Peirce and Ferdinand de Saussure, even though Peirce remained at this time an isolated vox clamantis in deserto. Then semiotics became a more and more certain topic in the 20th century. Remember that even in the framework of the Encyclopedia of Unified Science, spoke of semiotics, Carnap and Morris. And step by step we arrived to the semiotic boom of the mid-century, because it was in our century that communication became a heavy industry. Started his mythology to analyze different phenomena of communication in everyday life. Semiotics recognized itself as an unavoidable endeavor at the moment in which, at least in developed countries, it was clear that one can take the power not by putting his tanks on the street, but by seizing radio and TV, so that communication became a heavy industry. Semiotics has become a sort of moral critical duty when it was clear that mass media were the new sacred texts which produced ideology and changed our perception of the real world. Which phenomena will the semiotics of tomorrow face? In an era of globalization in which a different society will have the same technology and the same habits, probably the semiotic research will have to deal with many contemporary phenomena more or less linked to the pervasive presence of the global semiotic web. For certain scholars, see for example the present school of Tartu, semiotics has to broaden its inquiry to the kingdom of non-human and biological communication. But my personal concern is still about the development of a general semiotics. One of my amusements is to visit every year the American bookstore and to see how they change the classification of the semiotic stuff. In the 60s, the books on semiotics appeared in the shelves devoted to Marxism, psychoanalysis, and phenomenology. In the 70s, I found them under structuralism, along with Marxism, cinema, and feminism. Then they traveled from post-structuralism to postmodern and cultural studies. But it happened to me to find St. Augustine in the shelf of New Age. In the course of my explorations, I, however, was delighted in discovering decades ago that the Harvard bookstore set up a big and special room which included artificial intelligence, brain science, logic and analytical philosophy, psychology of perception, linguistics and semiotics, all together under the headings of cognitive science. No one has ever claimed that the cognitive sciences are a single science, and everyone is in agreement about maintaining them as a sort of interdisciplinary aggregate with a common nucleus. And it doesn't displease me that semiotics has come to be included in this confederation, independently of the question still debated, whether semiotics is a cognitive science or cognitive science are a branch of the general semiotics, as once the late Thomas Seeberg claimed. Semiosis has become a central concept of our contemporary scientific paradigm, as the opposition between res extensa and res cogitans in the 17th century. And it is certain that many disciplines can derive inspiration from semiotic concepts without necessarily being asemiotics. I have stressed the link between semiotics and cognitive science, and someone can object that there are many semiotic researchers which are not strictly connected with cognition, such as, let me say, analysis of literary text, researchers on the effect of mass media, social and cultural semiotics, and especially that fruitful and still in progress field of studies concerning translation. However, I think that one of the main duties of semiotics research must remain its cognitive orientation. It is not a question of being à la mode. Since a long time, Persian scholars have spoken of Peirce's semiotics as a cognitive semiotics. So please stick to the fundamental ideas of our forerunners. The semiotics of the middle of the last century, I think, for instance, of the French structuralists, insisted in demonstrating that our experience of the world is mediated by text, and texts are not a mirror-like representation of the world, but an interpretation of it as it turned to be interpreted by their addressee. In this textual turn, it was rediscovered Peirce's notion of unlimited semiosis. I want to make clear that I consider such an endeavor extremely productive. It helped us to recognize how much our allegedly naive experience was determined by discursive strategy. It was in such a perspective that we insisted so much on the duty of studying not the referential relationship between sign and things, but rather, or at least first of all, the semantic relationship between signs and meaning, or between signs and their interpretants. But we cannot deny that those approaches also produced the illusion that there was no more world at all, but only texts, and that semiosis was a continual and infinite deferral from sign to sign and from text to text. I am thinking not so much of Derrida as of a sort of savage American version of the idea of deconstruction that I once defined as a Native American merchandise produced on French license. I want to staunchly remember that there is a radical difference between the deconstructive drift and the Persian notion of unlimited semiosis. In the second chapter of his grammatology, Derrida looks for authorities able to legitimize his attempt to outline a semiosis of infinite play and of the infinite world of interpretation. And among the authors he quotes after Saussure and Jacobson, there is also Peirce. Allow me this long quote. Peirce goes very far in the direction that I have called the deconstruction of the transcendental signified, which at one time or another would place a reassuring end to the reference from sign to sign. I have identified logocentrism and the metaphysics of presence as the exigent, powerful, systematic, and the irrepressible desire for such a signified. Now, Peirce considers the indefiniteness of reference as the criterion that allows us to recognize that we are indeed dealing with a system of signs. What broaches the movement of signification is what makes its interruption impossible. The thing itself is a sign. The so-called thing itself is always already a representative shielded from the simplicity of intuitive evidence. The representative functions only by giving rise to an interpreter that itself becomes a sign, and so on to infinity. The self-identity of the signified conceals itself unceasingly, and it's always on the move. The represented is already a representative. From the moment that there is meaning, there are nothing but signs. End of my quote. The limit of this reading of Peirce is that Derrida didn't take into account the fact that Peirce doesn't stop here. It is true that Peirce speaks of a possible infinite interpretation, but for Peirce, the idea of meaning is such as to involve some reference to a purpose. A purpose is, without any shade of doubt, and at least in the Peircean framework, connected with something which lies outside semiosis. Maybe it has nothing to do with the transcendental subject, but it has to do with reference. When Peirce provides its famous definition of lithium as a packet of instruction aimed at permitting not only the identification but also the production of a specimen of lithium, he remarks the peculiarity of his definition is that it tells you what the word lithium denotes by prescribing what you are to do in order to gain a perceptive acquaintance with the object of the world. Every semiosic act is for Peirce determined by a dynamical object, which is the reality which by some means contrives to determine the sign to its representative. We produce representatives, that is interpretation, because we are compelled by something external to the circuit of semiosis. It is true that for Peirce the dynamical object can never be attained in its actual individual identity, but it is known only through the immediate object, and it is the immediate object which becomes the starting point for further interpretation. If perception is, as it is for Peirce, semiosis, that even at the original moment of our perceptive acquaintance with the external world, the external world becomes understandable to us only under the form of the immediate object, which is an interpreting phenomenon. For Peirce, when the sign is produced, the dynamical object is no more there. And before the sign were produced, it was not an object at all. But the presence of the representative, as well as the present in the mind or elsewhere of the immediate object, means that in some way the dynamical object, which is not there, was somewhere. Being no present or not being there, the object of an act of interpretation has been. Moreover, the dynamical object that was and which is absent in the ghost of the immediate one, can to be translated into the potentially infinite chain of its interpretation, will be or ought to be, says Peirce, an endless series of representations, each representing the one behind it, may be conceived to have an absolute object as its limit. Here appears something that cannot find a place within the constructive framework. Outside the immediate interpreter, the emotional, the energetic, and the logical one, all internal to the course of semiosis, there is, for Peirce, a final logical interpretant that is the habit. And the habit is a disposition to act upon the world, and this possibility to act, as well as the recognition of this possibility as a law, requests something which is very close to a transcendental instance, a community, as an intersubjective guarantee of a non-intuitive, non-naively realistic, but rather conjectural notion of truth. There is a real perfection of knowledge by which reality is constituted. For the pragmatic maxim, the meaning of any proposition is nothing more than the conceivable practical effects which the section would imply if the proposition were true. Then the process of interpretation must stop, at least for some time, out of language, at least in the sense in which not every practical effect is a semiosic one. It is true that even the practical effect might then to be spelled out by and through interpreters, and that the very agreement among the members of the community cannot but take the form of a new chain of signs. Nevertheless, the agreement concerned something, be it practical effect or the possibility of a practical effect, that is produced outside semiosis. There is something for Peirce that transcends the individual intention of the interpreter, and it is the idea of a community as a transcendental principle. This principle is not transcendental in the Kantian sense because it doesn't come before but after the semiotic process. It is not the structure of human mind that produces the interpretation, but the reality that semiosis builds up. Anyway, from the moment in which the community is pulled to agree with a given interpretation, there is, if not an objective, at least an intersubjective meaning which acquires a privilege over any other possible interpretation spelled out without the agreement of the community. Peirce once said that there is a true conclusion of semiosis, and it is reality. The problem of interpretation, which can be studied theoretically only by a general semiotics, is fundamental in order to face many philosophical positions according to which there are no facts, but only interpretation. A typical Nietzschean legacy, even though Nietzsche added that even his defense of interpretation against facts was itself an interpretation. Today, an appeal to a new realism was advocated, and within this framework, a general semiotics has something to say. Personally, I developed the idea of a negative realism, by which there are brute facts that challenge some of our interpretation and say that we cannot entertain them. Semiotics can also play a role in one of the main issues of our time, the education of young people about how to surf in the web. Once I was looking into the web for some information about Calcedonia. I don't remember why. From Calcedonia, I was sent, I don't remember what, a series of other fascinating links to the first English translation of the Rosicrucian Fama. A link in the commentary sent me to innumerable sites on the realm of Prester John. And from these I surfed until impressive series of documents on the 10 lost tribes of Israel. I frantically saved and printed a lot of curious documents, but more or less at 2 o'clock in the night or in the morning, I felt stoned and I switched my computer off. At that moment, I realized that I had forgot my original purpose in starting the research. In a continual deferral from text to text, I had lost the opportunity to produce the habit which would have allowed me to pick up what I originally wanted. This is a nice parable thing, which tells us 2 important things. First of all, that in the semiotic virtuality of the web, a very deconstructive creature indeed, we risk to lose every idea of purpose and of action. Secondly, that one of the duties of semiotics in the next millennium, if you want, will probably be to teach people not only how to use science to serve the infinite ocean of semiosis, but also how to return, not forever, but always at every stage of our semiotics interrogation, to the dynamical object. Maybe there are other interesting perspectives in the future of semiotics, but at this moment I don't remember that. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Excellent speech, excellent lecture. Ja chciałbym
Would like to explain tomorrow we are having a conference where Professor Eco, our Doctor Honoris Causa, is a participant and a patron. And the speech you could hear today was both a habitual speech by a Doctor Honoris Causa, as well as the opening speech of that conference. All the members of that conference are here. Now, I would like to hand to Professor Eco the book entitled The Power of Intellect, that has been prepared specially on this opportunity and is fully dedicated to our Dr. Honoris Causa.
Wysoki Senacie.
Members of the Senate, ladies and gentlemen, today's celebration is coming to an end. Please be seated. After the official part let me invite you for some refreshments. And then there is a happening in the students' campus just the opposite the building of the Faculty of Philology. It would be like a sentimental journey with colorful stories about students' life, students' habits, stories and memories. And the host for that event would be our graduate, former inhabitant of the campus, honorary member of the honorary committee, Mr. Krzysztof Skiba. This journey would end with the common grill nearby the former studio cinema. You are invited to join. Tomorrow, let me invite you for a ceremony of handing national awards, distinctions to our friends, our staff. It's going to begin at 9 in Wacław Schubert's Aula. At 2 p.m. in the same place, we will have doctoral degrees conferred. The celebration of the 70th anniversary of our university, the key event of that celebration, as we have been celebrating in various places, organizing various events, but the key moment related to the celebration of that anniversary started on Thursday this week and shall be completed tomorrow. The entire celebration is under the patronage of the President of the Republic of Poland, Mr. Bronisław Komorowski. That would conclude today's event. I would like to ask you to stay until the color guard leaves the room and the Senate leaves the room. Now I would like to ask the choir to perform Gaudemate Polonia.
Proszę o wyprowadzenie.
Please, the color guard leave the room.